Montana Territory, 1883. The snow was still clinging to the edges of the Rocky Hills when Joanna Granger rode through the night, her hands raw from the rains and her cheeks wet with tears she no longer tried to hide. She had not stopped crying since sundown. Somewhere behind her, miles back through the pine-thick ridges and frozen creeks, lay the house she fled and the man who broke her for shedding tears. She had cried when he called her stupid for burning the stew. She had cried when he tossed her wedding ring into the fire. But what finally broke her was the night he stood over her, yelling just because she wept over her stillborn baby, as if her grief made her weak, as if her tears were shameful, so she left. No note, no glance back. Just her father's old gelding, a sack of cornmeal, and a cracked compass pointing west. Her fingers were too stiff to guide the horse much farther, and her vision blurred from more than cold. But light flickered in the distance, a campfire, steady and warm, tucked in the shelter of a rock wall. She pulled the horse toward it, not caring who might be there. A cowboy sat near the flame, his hat tipped low, working a piece of jerky between his fingers. He did not reach for a gun when he saw her. Just narrowed his eyes, stood up slow, and looked at her the way a man does when he is trying to figure out if someone is real or a ghost. "You look half frozen," he said, voice low and rough like gravel under boots. "Get down." "I will not hurt you." Joanna slid off the horse, her legs giving out the second her boots touched the ground. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapped tight around herself, trying to breathe. She could not stop shaking. The cowboy walked over, not fast, not slow, then crouched beside her. He took her hand gently, his fingers warm and calloused. "Easy," he said. "You're safe now." She wanted to believe him, but the tremors would not stop. She could not meet his eyes. Her sobs came short and sharp, like she was choking on her own voice. He did not say anything else. Just sat with her, holding her hand with both of his, letting her cry. The fire cracked, the horse snorted softly nearby, and the cold faded from her skin a little. "I am Joanna," she whispered, voice raw. "I am Quentin Walker," he said, his grip steady. "You do not have to say anything more unless you want to." But she did, because for the first time in years, someone looked at her like she mattered. "I ran away," she said, breath catching. "My husband, he hated when I cried, said it made me weak. He hit me once for weeping over our baby. She was born too early. I buried her myself." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing cruel, nothing sharp, just nodded like he understood more than he let on. "Was he chasing you?" he asked. "Not yet, but he will." Quentin stood and threw another log on the fire. "Then we will leave at sunrise." "We?" she asked, unsure. He glanced back at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I am not letting you ride off alone again. You are hurt, cold, hungry. You need someone with you." She looked down at his hand still wrapped around hers. It was the first time in years someone touched her without anger. That night, she fell asleep near the fire, wrapped in a blanket he gave her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Quentin sitting with his rifle across his lap, watching the dark for anything that might come. By morning, the shaking had stopped. They rode west together. Joanna had no plan beyond getting farther away, but Quentin seemed to carry direction in his bones. He said he knew a small town near the Bitterroot Mountains where folks minded their own business, where a woman could find work and rest and not be looked at like trouble. They spoke little the first day. But on the second, when the sky turned gold and the trees thinned, she asked, "Why are you helping me?" He did not look at her when he answered, "Because someone should have a long time ago." They made camp near a stream that night. Quentin caught a rabbit and cooked it over the fire. Joanna sat across from him, watching the flames dance in his eyes. "You have always been out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Since my brother died, I worked cattle for a while, then drifted. I keep moving." "Why?" "Because staying never felt right." "Until now." She looked at him, heart skipping. He cleared his throat and stood, busying himself with the pot. The next few days passed with quiet ease. Joanna began to laugh again, soft and shy at first. Quentin listened like her voice was something rare. When her horse stumbled crossing a shallow creek, he was off his mount in a second, boots splashing through the water to help her down. "You all right?" he asked, hands at her waist. She nodded, but her breath caught when she looked up at him. His eyes were dark green, kind. He smelled like pine and smoke and something steady. He helped her back into the saddle, his hand brushing her knee. That night, while the fire crackled and the stars blinked overhead, she leaned closer to him. Not touching, not speaking, just near enough to feel the warmth of him beside her. She did not cry anymore, not when she thought of her baby, not when she remembered the bruises. Quentin made her feel like she could breathe again, like she was still whole. On the 5th morning, they reached the town of Willow Creek. It was a small place, no more than a general store, a blacksmith, and a boarding house with 2 rooms to rent. Quentin helped her off the horse outside the store. "You could stay here," he said. "I will help you get set up." She looked at him, her heart thudding. "And you?" He hesitated. "I do not have to go anywhere." Joanna stepped closer. She rested her hand over his. "I want you to stay," she whispered. His eyes searched her face. "You sure?" She nodded, and for the first time since she fled, she smiled. Quentin leaned in, slow and careful, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their lips met, soft and sure, like something they both had waited for without knowing it. When they pulled apart, she was not shaking anymore. She had never felt more safe in her life. He rested his forehead against hers. "I will not let anyone hurt you again." She closed her eyes. "I believe you," and she did. With her whole heart. The early spring thaw brought mist to the valley floor, curling low over the creek and softening the outlines of the cottonwoods. From the porch of the boarding house, Joanna watched the sun rise pale and quiet over Willow Creek. Her hands were wrapped around a tin cup of chicory brew, still too bitter for her liking, but warm enough to keep the chill from her fingers. Inside, Mrs. Maldon was already baking. The scent of lard biscuits drifted through the floorboards, mingling with smoke from the cookstove. Joanna heard the scrape of a chair, the thud of boots descending the stairs. Quentin stepped out onto the porch beside her, his hat low against the light. "You sleep all right?" he asked, voice low from sleep. "I did," she said. "Better than I expected," he nodded, rubbing at the stubble along his jaw. "You think you'll stay in town a while?" "I'd like to," she said, "if there's work to be had." "There is. I asked around yesterday while you were napping." He tipped his head toward the livery. Old man Harper's wife went back to Missouri to care for her sister. He needs someone to help with the ledgers and keep the place clean. Said he'd pay fair if you're decent with numbers. "I kept the books on my father's farm," she said. "Before I married, that should be enough." He paused, glancing sideways. "I can walk you over." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I want to try going alone." A flicker of something passed through his expression, not disappointment, but something softer. Trust, maybe. "I'll be at the smithy after," he said. "Helping with the shoeing if you need me." She nodded and stepped off the porch, her boots crunching over gravel. She didn't look back, but she felt his gaze follow her until the mercantile blocked the view. The livery smelled of hay, horses, and linseed oil. Harper was a thin, stoop-shouldered man with a crumpled-looking hat and tobacco-stained fingers. He handed her a broom before he said a word. "You know how to tally feed, girl?" "I do." "You know how to keep a ledger straight?" "I do." He spat into the sawdust and nodded. "Fine, sweep the aisle, then we'll talk numbers." By the time she left the stable, her back ached and her palms were dusted with straw. But her heart beat steady and calm. She was useful here, not pitied, not scolded, just needed. She found Quentin near the forge, sleeves rolled above his elbows, soot smudged across his forearms. He'd shed his hat and his hair curled slightly at the temples, damp with sweat. He didn't see her at first. He was holding a rasp, bent over a restless gelding, murmuring something low and even, hand steady on the animal's flank. Joanna waited until he was done, then stepped forward. "He hired me," she said. Quentin straightened, brushing off his hands. "Didn't doubt he would. He said I work like someone who's had to fight for a place. You do." They walked back to the boarding house together, passing the churchyard and the weaver's shop. She kept her hands folded, but now and then their shoulders brushed. It made her breath catch, though she didn't pull away. At supper, they sat side by side, sharing cornbread and stewed tomatoes. Mrs. Maldon asked no questions. The other boarders barely glanced up. It was the kind of quiet she hadn't known existed, people who didn't pry, who let silence sit between words without suspicion. After the meal, Quentin brought out a deck of cards. They played by lamplight in the parlor, low stakes, no winner tallied. She laughed once when he drew a queen of spades and sighed like it spelled doom. He looked up, surprised, then smiled back, a little shy. "You ever think about raising chickens?" he asked, sliding the cards into a neat stack. She blinked. "Not since I was a girl." "Why? There's a patch of land behind the smithy not being used. I've seen hens do all right there. I figured if you were thinking of staying, might be worth tending." She leaned back in the chair, watching his face in the lamplight. "You're thinking ahead." "I am." "Why?" He met her eyes, steady and slow. "Because you're not just passing through anymore." She didn't answer, not with words, but she reached across the table and laid her hand over his fingers curled around hers, gentle and sure. The next week passed in quiet rhythm. She rose early, swept the stalls, tallied oats and feed, then walked home with dirt on her boots and a sense of calm in her chest. Quentin worked long days, splitting his time between the forge and helping the weaver haul freight from the station. Sometimes they shared supper. Sometimes they sat outside as the stars came out, not speaking much, but never looking away. One evening, while the sun turned the ridges gold, she brought him a small cloth pouch. "What's this?" he asked. She pressed it into his palm. "Wild mint. I found a patch near the creek. Thought you might like it for tea." He turned the pouch over in his hand, then looked at her. "You remembered. You mentioned it once, that you used to drink it with your brother." He stared at her a long moment, quiet. Then he said, "I haven't talked about him with anyone in years." She waited. "He was younger. Took a bullet in Kansas, not meant for him. I held him until he died." She didn't speak, just reached for his hand. He squeezed back. They sat that way until the light faded. That night she didn't return to her room. She followed him up the stairs, steps soft as breath. At his door he paused, waiting. "I want to," she said. His hand found hers again. "Only if you're sure." She nodded. Inside, the room was warm. He lit the lamp low, then turned to her, his touch careful, unhurried. He kissed her like they had time, like nothing needed rushing. And for the first time in her life, she felt like every part of her was being seen. When they woke, the wind had shifted. Spring was coming in earnest. The land, like her, was beginning again. A light rain had passed in the night, leaving the earth dark and damp beneath Joanna's boots. She knelt just beyond the edge of the smithy's back lot, her skirts catching droplets from the tall grass as she dug her fingers into the soil. It turned easily under her hands, rich, with the scent of old leaves and ash from where Quentin had once burned off weeds. She pressed her palm flat to the earth and closed her eyes. It felt like a beginning. Quentin's voice came from behind. "You're thinking hard." She looked over her shoulder. He held a wooden crate in his arms, a slanted smile tugging at his mouth. "I'm deciding if it'll grow anything worth the trouble," she said. He crouched beside her, setting the crate down. Inside, 6 young hens blinked at her, feathers ruffled from the ride through town. "I figured you'd make better use of them than I would," he said. "They're young, should start laying by summer." She didn't answer right away. Her hand hovered over one of the birds, a pale brown hen with a sharp eye and a wary stillness. "You bought them for me?" "Well," he said, adjusting his knee in the damp grass, "for us, I suppose, if you're still wanting to build something here." Joanna nodded, not looking at him. "I do." They spent the morning fencing off the patch behind the smithy. Quentin worked the post-hole digger while she measured the spacing with a length of twine. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The rhythm of shared work wove something steady between them, a sense of direction, of quiet agreement. By midday, her arms ached and a blister had risen at the base of her thumb. She leaned on the top rail, watching Quentin hammer the last nail into the gate. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm, then glanced toward her. "You hungry?" She nodded. "I packed bread and cheese." They ate beneath the lean-to, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. She handed him a folded cloth with the food tucked inside. He took it, but his eyes were on her the whole time. "You've changed," he said. She didn't flinch. "How so?" "You stand different. You look people in the eye now." Her fingers tightened around the crust of bread. "I didn't know how much space I'd given up until I had it back." Quentin chewed slowly, then set the bread aside. "What would you do if you had more of it? Not just here, I mean. If you had time and quiet and no one telling you how to be." She looked at the hens scratching between the posts. One kicked up a worm and darted after it, wings flapping. "I think I'd like a small house," she said. with a stove that doesn't smoke and shelves for jars, maybe a bench by the door. I'd want to grow things. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was soft. I've wanted land for a while, never knew where to stop long enough to make it mean anything. She turned toward him. You think you might stop here? I already have. It hit her then, not a rush, not a jolt, but the stillness of it, the way he said it like a fact, like a stone sunk deep in a riverbed. The next morning, she found a note tucked under a folded shirt on her washstand, back after midday. Riding out to the North Ridge. Thought I saw a fence down. Q. She held the paper a moment longer than needed, then slipped it into the pocket of her apron and went downstairs. The town moved slowly under gray skies. She stopped at the mercantile for lye soap and twine, then crossed to the weaver's shop to ask after old sacks for chicken feed. Mr. Barron offered her two, patched but sturdy, and asked no questions when she insisted on paying for them in full. By the time she returned, the clouds had begun to break, letting streaks of amber light fall across the hills. She was halfway through boiling water for washing when she heard hooves outside. Quentin led his horse through the yard, a coil of wire over his shoulder and his jaw set tighter than usual. She stepped outside, apron damp. Was it the fence? He nodded. East side, looks like someone cut it, clean through, her forehead creased. Why would someone do that? Might have been rustlers testing for soft spots, could be nothing. He glanced toward the tree line. Could be your husband, a cold knot formed in her chest. I don't know how far behind he was, she said, or if he's even still looking. Quentin took her hand. I'll reinforce the fence tomorrow. I'll speak to the sheriff too, quiet-like, just in case, she nodded. I don't want to run again, you won't. That night, she sat in the parlor with her sewing while he carved slats for a nesting box. The room smelled faintly of pine and lamp oil. The wind had picked up outside, brushing against the windows in soft bursts. Did you ever think of marrying? She asked, not looking up from the hem she was stitching. He paused, knife still in hand. I used to. Then I saw too many folks make promises they never meant to keep. And now, he set the slat down gently, now I know what I'd want it to look like. She met his eyes. Someone I could build with, he said, not just live beside. Her breath caught, but her voice didn't falter. I don't have anything fancy to offer. He stood, walked to her, and knelt beside the chair. You offered me peace, he said. That's more than most ever do. Her hand found his shoulder. He leaned into it, eyes closed. I want to stay with you, she whispered. Not just in this town. With you, he rose then, lifted her carefully as if afraid of startling her. You already are, he said. Later, when the lamp burned low and the rest of the house had gone to sleep, she lay beside him under the quilt, her head on his chest. His heartbeat was slow, strong beneath her ear. She traced the edge of one of the scars on his arm, a pale line she hadn't noticed before. Where's that from? She asked. Rope burn, Wyoming, 2 winters ago. A bronc kicked and I grabbed the lead like a fool. She smiled, pressing a kiss to the place just above it. He shifted to face her fully, hand cupping her cheek. I'll build that house with you, he said. Bench by the door, shelves for jars, whatever you want. She touched her forehead to his. We'll build it together. Joanna stepped barefoot onto the porch, the chill of the early morning boards rising through her soles as she watched the mist lift off the creek behind the smithy. The hens rustled softly in their pen, one already scratching at the edge of the fence line. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes, hair loose down her back, and listened for signs of Quentin. He hadn't come in during the night. She pulled on her boots without stockings and followed the path behind the lean-to, the dew wetting the hem of her nightdress. His tracks were clear in the soft earth deep, heavy steps that led toward the ridge behind town. Near the base of the rise, she saw him. He was seated on a fallen log, rifle laid across his knees, his back straight and still. A canvas bag rested beside him, half open, a few slices of bread tucked inside. He didn't turn when she approached. You didn't come back, she said. I heard coyotes on the ridge, figured I'd keep watch. She sat beside him, the damp wood seeping into her dress. That all? He ran a thumb along the stock of the rifle. I found a boot print I didn't like, too sharp, not worn down to belong to a ranch hand. Her throat tightened. Did you follow it? Only far enough to see it led off the trail. Whoever it was, they're not camped close. He looked at her then, eyes shadowed. Do you want me to speak with the sheriff about keeping watch? Might be nothing, but if it's not. She reached for his hand. I want to stay, and I want to stay safe. We'll talk to him, he nodded and let out a breath. All right. They walked back together in silence, his rifle slung across his back now. Her fingers stayed laced through his, their bare feet brushing grass and stone. At the porch, she paused. I've been thinking, she said. I could take in mending. Mrs. Dow's eyesight's failing, and she said her hands cramp in the cold. There's work to be done. You don't have to take on more. I want to build something steady. I'm not used to that yet. He looked at her, long and quiet. You're not the same woman who walked into my camp, he said. I know. He touched her cheek, the pad of his thumb brushing a curl from her temple. I liked her. I like this you too. She leaned into his hand. I want to marry you, his breath caught. Joanna, I don't need a ring, not now. But I want you beside me when the frost comes in again, when the hens stop laying and the stove needs feeding. I want to be yours. He stepped back, just enough to reach into his coat pocket. From it, he drew out a folded slip of cloth. Inside, nestled against the linen, was a narrow band of copper. Unpolished, hand-worked, scarred from the forge. I made this 2 nights ago, he said. Didn't know yet when to ask. She took it with both hands, heart thudding. You just did. He slid it onto her finger. It was warm from his skin. She lifted her eyes. I'm not afraid anymore. He kissed her then, not rushed, not tentative. Just honest. Later that day, they spoke with the sheriff. Quentin kept his voice low, steady, while Joanna stood beside him, chin lifted. The sheriff promised to send a deputy to ride the ridge come dawn and offered no judgment when he looked between them and saw what they were becoming. By dusk, Joanna was fitting a new curtain above the small window in the smithy's back room. Quentin had cleared out the tools from the far corner, making space for a bed frame he'd begun building from leftover pine. She draped the fabric in place and turned toward him. It's not fine lace, she said. It's yours. That's plenty. He folded his arms, leaned against the wall. Do you want to say words for the wedding? I'd like to. Not in the church, though. Just here, just us. I'll shave, he said, and wear the clean shirt. She crossed to him, her arms wrapping around his waist. I'll braid my hair. And I'll stand beside you while the sun comes up. He kissed the top of her head and rested his chin there in the quiet that followed. The hens clucked softly outside, and the wind shifted through the trees. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. They had already begun. By the time the wind shifted for good, carrying the scent of thawed earth and sap-heavy pine, Quentin had finished the bed frame. He'd sanded the edges smooth by hand, and Joanna had stitched a ticking mattress from scrap cotton and wool batting gathered from townsfolk willing to trade for fresh eggs or a few mended shirts. She'd never made a bed from start to finish, but she took her time with it, measuring the corners with care, folding each edge so it lay flat and clean. The morning they spoke their vows, there was no audience but 3 hens scratching near the porch and the creek running full with meltwater behind them. Quentin wore the blue shirt he'd saved from a cattle drive in Nebraska. Joanna's dress was cream-colored calico, the sleeves let out to fit her shoulders better. She had braided her hair low, tying it with a strip of ribbon she'd found tucked in her old sewing basket. They stood beneath the cottonwood that grew behind the smithy, the one that leaned slightly east, its bark scarred from years of storms. Quentin held her hands, thumbs brushing over her knuckles as he looked into her eyes. You're the first place I ever wanted to stay, he said. And I'll stay for as long as you'll have me. I've learned what it is to be quiet inside, she said, and I learned that with you. You're the only man I've known who doesn't need to speak to say something true. He didn't kiss her right away. He just looked at her that same steady way he had from the first moment, like she was something he meant to protect. Then, gently, he leaned in, and she met him halfway. Afterward, they broke bread together on the porch sourdough she'd baked the night before, with butter traded from the widow down the lane. Quentin poured chicory into 2 mugs, and though it was still bitter, they drank it smiling. As dusk came on, they moved into the newly cleared space behind the smithy, now their home. The cot had been replaced with the bed they made together. A small rug, borrowed from Mrs. Maldon and scrubbed clean, lay beside it. Joanna had sewn a curtain of blue ticking for the window, and a shelf Quentin built held a tin cup, a book of psalms, and a folded cloth of wild mint leaves. Later that week, the sheriff returned with news. "We found a camp east of the ridge, empty now. Looked like someone stayed a night or two and moved on. Might have been your trouble," he told Quentin. Joanna didn't flinch. She only asked, "Did you find anything left behind? Just a broken spur and a burnt-out fire." "Nothing with a name on it." She nodded once, then turned back to the henhouse, where one of the birds had begun laying in earnest. That evening, Quentin watched her from the doorway as she moved through the garden bed they'd started near the fence. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair pinned up, and her hands were covered in soil. Still, she worked with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly what you were doing and why. "Thinking of planting more carrots?" he asked, stepping beside her. "Onions. They'll keep us through winter if we dry them right." He crouched down, pressing his palm into the dirt beside hers. "You ever think about children?" She looked at him, her face unreadable for a breath. Then she nodded. "I do, but I want to give it time. I want to grow into this piece before I bring someone new into it." He touched her wrist lightly. "I want that too, all of it, but the way it comes. No rushing." They spent that spring building habits, watering before dusk, mending together by lamplight, sharing supper with neighbors now and then, but always returning to the quiet of their own space. Quentin took on more work at the forge, and Joanna began teaching a few of the town girls their letters at the back table of the mercantile on Sundays. One night, they sat on the bench he'd finished carving, the one she'd always dreamed of having near the door. It faced west, where the sun fell behind the ridge in wide gold bands. Joanna leaned into his shoulder, her head resting just below his collarbone. "I keep thinking about how I didn't know this life could be mine," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "It's ours now. You still think about leaving?" "Not once since I met you." She laced her fingers through his and closed her eyes. "Then I think we're home." Years passed gently. The carrots grew long and sweet, the hens multiplied. Neighbors came to count on Joanna's calm, even ways and Quentin's quiet strength. Together, they built a home that didn't need to be large to feel full. They added a second room when the time came, after Joanna's belly rounded and the morning sickness passed. Their daughter was born in early autumn, with a head of dark hair and a cry like a creek breaking through thaw. They named her Claire, for the clear light that filled their doorway the morning she arrived. Joanna rocked her by the fire that first winter, humming songs passed down from her mother. Quentin would sit beside her, whittling toys from pine or reading aloud from the Psalms. There were hard days, Claire's fever in her second year, a frost that nearly ruined the onions, but they met them together, always together. In the years that followed, their love never faded. It deepened into something rooted and quiet, the way trees grow into one another when planted close and left undisturbed. And when they sat together on the porch bench in late evenings, their daughter playing with a wooden doll at their feet, the wind soft through the cottonwoods, there was nothing left unspoken between them. They had built a life that held every part of who they were: grief, strength, quiet joy, and they had done it side by side, forever, exactly as they were meant to.